is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here with you on a Tuesday afternoon. You could be watching live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, or listening to us after the fact on any of your favorite podcast platforms. In any case, give us a like, a thumbs up, write us a good review, in which case I will read it out here on the podcast. If you give us a 5-star review, you have something nice to say, or even something less than nice to say, I will say it out here on the Banner Ravens podcast. Jonas, we got a lot to get to today. We're going to touch on some of our observations from Ravens rookie minicamp, which we were there for last week. We're also going to touch on some free agents who are still out there in the market who might interest the Baltimore Ravens. And you've got a special look back at some of the best beefs in Ravens history. But first, Jonas, I have to give a mouse update because I was just in a local retail store, and I got recognized for being on the Banner Ravens podcast by a loyal listener, Andrew, which is a huge flex for being recognized. But I got the comment, "Good luck with the mouse." And I have to provide, I feel like this mouse is going to be the majority of our content for the time in which it is living. So when we last spoke, the mouse was in my home, and I discovered it on top of a ventilation grate. What happened after that, Jonas, the very day that we recorded that last episode, I came home, I walked in the door, and it was sitting on my desk like it was ready to do work.
Or do
war against my psyche. I panicked. I was on the phone with my parents at the time, and I just walked in and said, "It's here. It's right here." My mom smartly said, "Take a picture, get some documented evidence." I did. And for those who are watching live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, here is that picture. First off, he's adorable. He looks like a calico critter that my sister would have gotten when she was 10 years old. It's hard to be frightened by this thing looking directly at it, but when it's sitting on your desk, that's something. And then, Jonas, after this, cleaned out my room, did a complete, I lost it in the corner of my room, did a complete, overhaul of everything that I have. And I'm cleaning the corner of my room, and I discover that some of the carpet has been torn up. And I look closer, and the scene in Shawshank, not to spoil a movie that came out in 1992, but in Shawshank where they can't figure out where he's gone, and they throw the rock right through the poster. That's how I felt, because there was a 2-inch hole where the tiny, tiny mouse, the adorable little mouse, little Mickey, climbed through. So I patched it with some steel wool. I haven't seen him since. That is my mouse update, Jonas.
It's a good mouse update. I'm just remembering now that the reason that I had to have my car basically towed to the local Hyundai dealer was because some mice or vermin of some kind had the winter.
I remember this.
Buried into the hood of my relatively new Hyundai Tucson and just chewed through the wiring. And apparently it's not an uncommon thing. So mice are everywhere. I do have a question though. Why are we gendering this mouse as a him? Do we know in fact that it has
that's a good point.
that it's a he?
And do you know the worst?
Because it has this kind of maniacal, diabolical bent to it, we are just assuming that it's a guy.
The worst part is I sent the picture to my mom, and my mom was like, "Ooh, it looks fat. I hope it's not pregnant." And I said, "Stop. That's it. Enough. Don't put that in my head. That is the worst possible outcome of all of this." I haven't seen the guy, so honestly, I just hope that he reappears just for content purposes. I feel like people have suggested I could just capture him in a little cage and use him for some videos, because he or she, I should say, is adorable. But Jonas, do you want to get back to some actual football talk at some point?
Honestly, this mouse talk was more exciting than what we saw on Saturday.
This is what the offseason.
I can go either way.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk before we get into our rookie minicamp discussion. Let's talk about a deal that went down since we last recorded, and that would be wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr., former Baltimore Raven, signing with the Miami Dolphins on a deal that is reportedly 1 year, $3 million, and can go up to $8.25 million with incentives. To put that in perspective, Nelson Aguilar got a 1 year, $3.75 million deal from the Baltimore Ravens to return. So essentially the Dolphins, who are already loaded with, they already have their wide receiver 1 and their wide receiver too. They already have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but they wanted a veteran wide receiver to add to that group. And look, as poorly as Odell Beckham Jr.'s start to the season went last year, and as long as it took him to get going, and as much frustration as Ravens fans might have at the end of the season with how things ended, the Ravens still have some production to replace in OBJ here. He did still provide them with close to 600 yards, and they don't seem to have an internal replacement unless you count the recent drafting of fourth-round pick Devontae Walker.
Paul, I gotta, if we can rewind this, I think you really missed an opportunity there. The opportunity for a transition from the mouse to Odell was as obvious as could be. It was, speaking of dudes who got some cheddar.
That would have been good, yeah. Or came up small.
Yeah, I mean, like,
where you're gonna go with.
Yeah, well, Odell finished the season kind of iffy. He finished the season kind of iffy, but he was a guy who filled a role that the Ravens are obviously, like you said, Paul, counting on Devontae Walker to fill, which is a guy who can be an X receiver. It's not really something that, at least to our resource database, has a lot of clarity in terms of like who was the X, who was the the guy who was kind of who filled that role on isolated routes. But as to the best of our abilities, can figure it out. Odell was the Ravens' best option last year. Maybe that was all just because for that 4 or 5 week stretch where he was a very good, very productive receiver, it kind of overinflates the rest of his production. But just looking at Sports Info Solutions, he led the Ravens in the number of isolated routes last season. So it's kind of what you think about. And he was also the most effective guy when running those routes. He was 2.8 yards per route run when he was, as a isolated receiver. That was a lot more effective than Odell. Excuse me, a lot more effective than Rashad Bateman, a lot more effective than Zay Flowers. Actually, ironically, the most effective receiver for the Ravens last year was Mark Andrews when he was an isolated guy. So I had a story last year about how Mark Andrews was actually wide receiver one. I still kind of sort of feel that way, for everyone talking about how the Ravens need this, the Ravens need that. Obviously, Mark Andrews is probably not going to go for 1,400 yards this year. He's probably not going to be the kind of guy that you're asking to run, 9 balls down, 30, 40 yards downfield. But I think people overlook just how effective he can be in certain routes. But, beyond what the Ravens are losing with Odell as a route runner, as a guy who can win in certain spots, he's just a good teammate. I mean, I think it was heartwarming to hear Rashad Bateman in his interview with Glenn Clark last week talk about how when he got that 3-year extension, one of the first guys to call was Odell Beckham Jr. And I think you can't overlook that in terms of just the makeup of what kind of comprises a good locker room, basically.
Yeah, he did provide something that the Ravens will be without, and it's still going to be a very young wide receiver room. Nelson Aguilar, really the only veteran in there, and he's slotted in as maybe the fourth wide receiver in that room. So maybe there is a move to be made, and we'll touch on later in the podcast. Maybe a wide receiver out there on the free agent market who's still hanging around, who could make sense for them to fill that void. All right, Jonas, we were at the Ravens facility to witness a portion of the rookie minicamp. We saw very, very little. Basically, these guys stretching and then running against air for most of it. What I want to get your takeaways from it, but first off, a question for you. We saw Nate Wiggins in person, standing at the podium, running against air on the practice field. How skinny did he look to you?
He looks skinny. I don't think that weight. I don't think that weight gain is going to happen overnight. I think if we all are honest with ourselves about what happens to our bodies over the pandemic, it takes some time to put on weight. Good weight, bad weight. Who can say? Who can say just how many pounds I put on and then took off when I got a little too in love with peanut butter and banana sandwiches. We can keep that for yeah, right. Do mice like bananas?
I'm sure they love peanut
butter. They probably like a big. Yeah, they probably like whatever they can get their hands on, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but just kind of spurred by this prompt, I did get curious to see just how kind of limiting as a barrier to entry for like football success weight can be. And I got curious, and there are some guys who were like 180 pounds who ranked very highly on PFF's list of the top cornerbacks last year. And, even Devon Witherspoon, who was, I think, like a number 5 overall pick for the Seahawks, thereabouts.
Yeah.
It was interesting that he didn't really have a whole lot of minuses on his scouting report coming into the draft last year about what, how much of a limitation his weight could be, because he was a 5'11", 181-pound guy. I think that's at least what he weighed in at the combine, or maybe what the Seahawks listed him at. But he was a guy who rated very, very well, obviously in coverage, but then also in run defense. So, he was able to overcome some of his limitations with a maybe better than expected, arm length, which is obviously something that we probably didn't talk as much as we should have about with Nate Wiggins. How it's not just the weight, but it's also the fact that he does have some relatively short arms for being a 6'2" or 6'1" guy. So we'll see. I mean, I still think that if he can put on 5 pounds of good muscle, 10 pounds of good muscle, then we are probably not really talking as much as some of the critics and some of the haters suggest that we would be. I mean, he's going to have football be a full-time job for him. He's not going to have to worry about class. He's not going to have to worry about folks back in the Carolinas, wherever he's from. So I do think it's probably a realistic expectation for this guy who does have this better than average frame to put on some muscle. But yeah, I mean, he is skinny, but there are a lot of skinny guys in the NFL who do pretty well.
That's true. What were some of your other observations from camp? We saw a couple guys held out of full participation. It was good to see that not a rookie, but would be playing in his first games. Andrew Voorhees, the guard that was taken in the 7th round of the 2023 draft, not in a knee brace. And of course, the Ravens expect him to compete at the guard spot this year with some other guys that they've brought in. Adisa Isaac, the 5th round pick by the Ravens in the draft. 3rd round pick, I should say, rather. End of day 2 round pick out of Penn State. Out with a tweaked hamstring, but look, it is the very beginning of May. A tweaked hamstring should not affect him at all. Rasheen Ali was without a helmet, the running back from Marshall, and he wasn't really participating in all the activities, obviously. That is probably because, he did have that biceps injury that he sustained during the Senior Bowl. And then center Nick Samek, who had a broken fibula, was just kind of on the sideline watching the center that they got in the 7th round. Any other, aside from injury notes, any other things stick out to you maybe at Ravens rookie minicamp, Jonas?
Maybe I'm looking at the wrong things, but did you notice, Paul, just how big Andrew Voorhees' biceps were?
They were large.
Like, a couple of pythons, a couple boa constrictors there. I wish I knew more snakes, more slithery things to compare those to, but quite big.
Don't have the mouse on when we're talking snakes.
This is the kid that just keeps on giving. But yeah, I mean, like, I think it's probably not surprising, because obviously you would expect that a guy who did the kind of impressive things that he did at the combine, on the bench press with a torn ACL, would be a guy who probably spends a lot of time in the weight room. Obviously, there's not an event at the combine that is just, how many times can you pull 50 pounds? But I would imagine that Voorhees probably would have done a good job. And, considering everything that we've heard about just how much time he's spent in the weight room, how much time he spent working out, just trying to get healthy, it's probably not a surprise that a guy has, a very filled out upper body. But, and again, I don't know how much correlation there is between the size of one's forearm or the size of one's bicep and actual football success. But hey, you would much rather have a guy look like that than Andrew Wiggins. Right?
True. I will say it doesn't always translate, like you said, to arm strength. I always think of Tim Tebow, who had the strongest arms I've ever seen, looking wise, visually, and just could not throw the football more than 20 yards down the field. So it doesn't always translate that way. Numbers wise, we saw these guys actually suit up with their jerseys. I got to say, Adisa Isaac's number 50, I don't know what he was thinking. Have you ever seen a good player wear number 50? Nate Wiggins, number 2, that's an elite number choice. Number 50? What was Adisa Isaac thinking?
I'm trying to remember. I'm looking right now. I mean, Kyle Van Noy last year was number 50, right?
So then is Van Noy going to change as well?
Let's see.
Is a
Ravens
third round rookie
roster.
going to usurp veteran Kyle Van Noy's
So,
number?
so maybe I guess Kyle Van Noy went back to 53. That's what he wore in New England.
Okay.
That's an interesting consideration. For me, yeah, I think a lot of this is just based on like the numbers that you grew up with and what you know to be a sick number because of the player who wore it. Like, we talked before, I think, before Devontae Walker even got 81, that him wearing 81 at Kent State, and that's obviously why he chose it, made him look very impressive because of all the really impressive 81s who've worn it.
Yeah.
Think of Randy Moss. You think of guys like that. Roger Rosengarten, I think it was probably, it doesn't really matter what number he wears as long as it's not a lame number, because with him wearing 70 underneath the very long Rosengarten, almost had like the rainbow, needing the
The
rainbow to get
Saltalamacchia
all.
rainbow. Yeah.
Yes. It doesn't really matter. I like 26 as a number for Rasheen Ali.
I did too.
I was a little surprised that TJ Tampa wore number 27, and then explained to me that it wasn't because of Tampa. So people pointed out that Tampa Bay, the area code for that, I believe, is 727. But TJ Tampa said no, it was just a complete coincidence that he wore 27. It had nothing to do with actual Tampa. It's not a bit.
Yeah.
Don't say that it's a bit. It's just complete coincidence.
Well, I think he also wore number 2 at Iowa State, and people were pointing out that that's Tampa 2. So should the
Yeah.
Ravens, have to make switch to the Tampa 2 defense just to make TJ Tampa fit in? All right,
The,
Jonas.
the,
It's possible. Let's get to the free agents that are left out on the market. And I don't want to spend too much time here because you got to get to your beef history. And you've already written about this on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Your dog in the background agrees that you got to do that. There are some guys that are left out on the market that could intrigue the Ravens. And of course, patience is on Eric DeCosta's side. We saw last year how he manipulated the free agent market. He was patient. He waited until guys became available, until guys were willing to settle for his price point, and until the free agents that he signed ceased to affect the comp pick formula. And now that we are after the draft, that is a consideration here. All these guys aren't going to affect the comp pick formula. And he was able to get some bargains. Jadeveon Clowney, obviously. Kyle Van Noy signed off the couch. Ronald Darby. These are guys that actually had an impact on the team that won their division, that were signed very late into the process. So don't discount the guys that are still out there and think that they can't contribute anything simply because they are still out on the street. In terms of positions to target, I still think they could still use some depth at outside linebacker. I think they could use some competition to the offensive line, maybe at one of those guard spots. And a third safety, I think, is another big thing behind Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams, because other than Sanusi Kane, they didn't address safety in the draft. The 5 guys that you wrote about, Jonas, on the BaltimoreBanner.com article, you started with guard Dalton Risner. You had wide receiver Michael Thomas, tight end Mercedes Lewis, edge Carl Lawson, and safety Adrian Amos. All of those guys fit into different buckets here. I really like the idea of adding Michael Thomas only because he fits a prototype, and nothing that he would fit perfectly in the Ravens' history of signing wide receivers who have had great careers well after their prime. Jeremy Maclin, Deshaun Jackson, Dez Bryant. This would be signing Michael Thomas would be another addition to a long line of over the hill wide receivers added to that room. Oh, Jonas, I can't hear you.
I had to sorry, I had to mute
There we
the
go.
mute the mute the mute the mic for the dog. Yeah, Odell. You forgot about Odell. That was the most
Yeah.
obvious recent example.
He provided more than
He
the 3 other guys I did mention, though, I will say.
yeah, for sure. And it was interesting to look at some of what Michael Thomas put on tape, what he was able to put up statistically. You know, he was somewhat effective, somewhat productive. You know, the 448 yards kind of speaks for itself, but that was in an offense in New Orleans that was passing a lot. You know, yards per route run. We've talked about it, how it's a pretty effective metric in terms of efficiency, productivity. I think even before he went down with that season-ending knee injury last year, his yards per route run was the worst of his career. So, you know, whether you want to blame just Derek Carr, which I'm inclined to do, whether you want to blame just the overall, you know, offensive infrastructure and architecture in New Orleans that he was dealing with, also fair. But it's pretty clear that, you know, his best days are behind him. You would have to be relying on a, you know, Jadeveon Clowney type resurgence, you know, a guy who has had the talent, who has put really good years on tape, and maybe just a change of scenery, maybe getting into a Ravens, you know, culture or system where you can kind of scale back what he does in practice. You maybe say, you know, we're fine with you changing your body to better accommodate what you need physically. You know, I think Jadeveon Clowney last year had talked about how he attributed some of his success to him just not having as much weight on him. You know, he felt like he could still do what he needed to do without having, you know, an extra 10 to 15 pounds on that frame of his. Maybe that's not the best thing for Michael Thomas because so much of his game is predicated on physicality. And, you know, if you don't have Michael Thomas playing bully ball, or at least playing pulley ball at the kind of playing weight that he had back in the day, is it still, you know, effective? Can he still kind of get away with those, you know, those slants where he's just kind of, you know, rocketing off the cornerback who's guarding him and, you know, just kind of buying himself that yard or two of space that he needs? Can he still, you know, be that effective back shoulder type guy? If he doesn't have that, you know, effective level of space that he's creating with his upper body or lower body, I don't know. We don't know the medicals. That's obviously the big consideration here. To have the, you know, I think it's like 20 games over the past 4 years that he's played. It's really not all that much of a track record of, you know, him being a reliable presence out there. But again, this is the period of the offseason where it's just start throws. Who can you get for a discounted rate, hoping that they're going to be able to deliver value? We don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys out there that are big names that are pushing 30, 31 at positions where age
Or
tends to be a
40
big
in the case of
or
Mercedes
40.
Lewis.
Mercedes Lewis is 40 years old. When you put his name on this list, Jonas, I was utterly shocked only because I didn't know he was still playing in the league. However, he would not be signed to be a pass catcher as a tight end in this offense. He would be, a blocker, good inline blocker still at this stage of his career. And maybe for an offense that already has two good pass catchers at tight end, maybe could use somebody like Mercedes Lewis to just help out this Todd Monken offense as a blocker.
Yeah, and you know, you think how can this guy possibly be a reliable presence? But he's I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I think like every season for the past 3 or 4 years, he's been over 300 snaps. So it's not like he is just a guy that you roll out as a goal line blocker. Like
Right.
these offenses, obviously not great offenses that he's been playing in, but still, you would have thought that if there were a better option, the teams that he's played on would have found it by now. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
are right that he's basically at this point in his career closer to a sixth offensive lineman than he is to like a viable, you know, fifth, receiver out there in the formations. But still, we don't know if Charlie Kohler is going to be a viable option. You know, obviously Pat Ricard has dealt with some injury stuff over the years because of just how big he is, and you know, he's at times been like close to 300 pounds, and at a certain point that tends to wear on guys physically. Obviously, so does being close to 40 years old. That also takes its toll on certain players in the NFL. But still, I don't think it's unrealistic that, you know, a guy like that could be worth $1 million, $2 million, depending on where he lands and just how teams value that kind of presence in their offense.
Yeah, he is 9 years older than the next next oldest guy on this list, Jonas. 31 years old for Adrian Amos, 31 for Michael Thomas. Dalton Reisner is turning 29 in July. But these are positions also, with the exception of guard. Obviously, I think guard is a position where you are getting into your peak when you're in your 27, 28 range. But when you talk about cornerbacks and safeties, particularly cornerbacks, I mean, Stephon Gilmore is still out there. Safety Quandre Diggs is still out there. Safety Jamal Adams is still out there. Cornerback Xavier Howard is still out there if you're looking for some depth out there. But, studies have shown that a lot of cornerbacks and safeties fall off a cliff when they get into their age 31, 32 seasons, if they get to that point, because it's just a position where top speed is of the utmost importance. And it's similar with wide receivers. There's not as steep a drop off, and we're seeing wide receivers go deeper into their careers. But at cornerback, that's another position, though, where, Eric DaCosta found value last summer. We talk about Arthur Mollett as somebody who's a little bit older, and Ronald Darby, somebody who's a little bit older. And the Ravens were able to get something there, but it's not a guarantee that somebody like Xavier Howard or Stephon Gilmore or Adrian Amos is going to be able to stay productive at that point in their career. It wouldn't harm the Ravens, though, to go out and sign one or two of these guys to, $3 million deals, invite them to camp, and see if they have anything left. The Ravens obviously safeguarded the need for that with the drafting of Nate Wiggins, but maybe they could use a little bit more depth there. Is there one position that you would prioritize above the rest, Jonas, in terms of outside linebacker, offensive line, wide receiver, and cornerback / safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be offensive line. I think
Yeah.
Reisner is probably the obvious solution there, just because he has had that track record. I mean, even last year, I think he was top 10 in pass block win rate. So he's still not even close to being over the hill. I mean, he's 28 right now, turns 29 in July. We obviously know that the Ravens need some more security there at left guard, and guess what? That's the position that he played last year for Minnesota. So we know that he can be an effective player. We know that that there is a need there for the Ravens to fill out that roster. But we just don't know what he's asking for. There was a tweet last this past March when free agency was kind of picking up, where he's basically very much online saying, "Hey, look at my credentials. All I'm asking for is the chance to be paid like a starting level guard." So he and his team are clearly looking for a price point that maybe some teams in the first wave or two of free agency were not willing to put up. We don't know what he's asking for. We don't know if he's come down on that asking price at all. But I think as it stands for guards who might be in the mix, cornerbacks who might be in the mix, if the Ravens sign a guy at this point in the process, considering the work that they did in the draft, the work that they did in undrafted free agency, that tells you that they do not feel comfortable about the guys that they have at that spot. You know what I mean? Like there's very much intentionality with the Ravens or any team, I think, at this point in the offseason. Like if they are signing a guy, take them at their word that this is a position that they clearly feel needs to be addressed, because signing a guy, whether it's for $1 million, $3 million, $5 million, it's not just monopoly money that they're handing out.
Yeah.
They are obviously looking to make a splash, or at least fill a hole of some kind in the offseason process.
Yeah, these are when it comes to their guard competition, the Ravens have a bunch of guys who have high ceilings but low floors. They have competition there. They just don't have guaranteed starters there. They have Saleh, they have Andrew Voorhees, they have Ben Cleveland. Maybe they give Roger Rosengarten a look at guard. Maybe they give Nick Samac, 7th round pick, a look at guard, even though he was a center in college. So they have competition there. Just one or two of these guys, obviously, has to stand out, because otherwise they will be looking at the market and saying, maybe we need to upgrade here with a little bit more of a veteran presence, like John Simpson did provide them last year. All right, Jonas, do you want to touch on your beef history? Should I just mute my mic, give you the full screen, take off my headphones, go get a cup of coffee, come back in like 10 to 15 minutes?
No, I mean, we're going to need you to set the table here, Paul. Why don't you explain? Why don't you explain Kendrick Lamar
This
versus
is
Drake for everyone?
I don't want to have anything to do with this. This was your brainchild. This is your baby. I want to give you I have been despite my best efforts to not know anything about this Kendrick and Drake beef, it has been forced into my timeline and I have seen enough of it. So why don't you give us the best explanation while keeping this PG of what is going
I
on and why
can't
you
though.
were incited to do this?
I was incited to do it because Kendrick and Drake is a thing right now, and
Is a thing.
you search, you search Kendrick and Drake explained on the Google machine, and you can't find an article that is shorter than like 1,500 words. So that is a lot of talking time. We do not have a lot of talking time. All I will say is that they and their feud and their beef was, I think, very much the inspiration for I think what I have here, which was not so much a Ravens beef history, but a Ravens beef forecast, and kind of explaining what might be on the table for 2024 in terms of like what we've seen, because obviously, there's nothing more titillating, there's nothing more exciting than conflict. That is very much the kind of the agent that gets people going on sports talk radio, politics. Conflict is the thing that very much drives us as a consumer culture, as a political culture, sports culture. That there is nothing more that people love than seeing people put against one another. That is still, unfortunately, kind of the animating principle, I think, in modern life, whether it's country
Where is
versus
this going,
country,
Jonas?
state versus state.
Can we
I'm
get
just
this
explaining
back on track?
why we are talking about this. I don't want to, have this become a 15-minute soliloquy. So I do want to kind of bounce this off back and forth with you. But you do think about, kind of the great rap beefs of our times,
Sure.
not just current day, but looking back at, through the years. Unfortunately, some rap beefs have gotten violent, and that's why I don't want to talk about those. But I do think it's kind of fun to think about, what we could be talking about and frame it in such a way that it makes sense. And the honorable mention beefs that I think that we could be talking about this year are Lamar Jackson stands versus Jaden Daniels stands. You have that ultimate, you have that connection of the Baltimore Washington Parkway. There are going to be probably some folks in DC who are looking at, what Jaden Daniels does in the preseason and says, "Oh my God, he's already better than Lamar Jackson." No, that's not going to happen. It's going to need at least more than a year. Another potential beef that we could be talking about, or that we have seen kind of come to fruition, is Rashad Bateman versus Slim Fit Pants. He's the guy who loves who loves pants that billow down at the bottom. We can say that. And then I think maybe, I don't know if this is an honorable mention or maybe just kind of a low stakes thing, but J.K. Dobbins versus the Ravens. We know that he is on a team now that is going to perhaps feature him. We know that he has not always felt great about what the Ravens did for him. Nor do we think that the Ravens felt great about how things ended last year. I don't know if it's going to turn into anything, but we know that he was mad at the Ravens for playing him in the preseason. We know that he felt not that great about how the Ravens kind of treated him during that late stage breakout in 2022, where he was kind of having some side eye toward the Ravens. Like, you guys, didn't want me to get the arthroscopic surgery. I did get the surgery. Look at me now. He got, held at a training camp last year. The vibes weren't great. And again, unfortunately, he did have the another season-ending injury. He wasn't able to kind of have another moment where he could kind of really stick it to the Ravens. We don't know exactly what his future might hold for in LA, but we do know that they're playing, and we do know that he kind of likes to talk a little bit. He does like to peacock a little bit. So again, I don't know if this is going to be a big deal for the Ravens where there is a beef, but it is something to kind of keep an eye on.
Okay. Do you first off, I give myself the utmost credit for sitting through that and listening to that explanation of your beef. If you had to make a comparison though to actual beefs in the music world, would you have comparisons for some of these beefs? I mean, we've seen you referenced a few of them. Obviously, the Kendrick Drake beef is the most recent, but I mean, I think we saw, what was it, Meek Mill and Drake? They had a beef several years ago that had a clear winner, and that was Drake came out on the right side of that one, unlike the current one that's going on. But do you have comparisons for some of these beefs?
Yeah, I do. Fortunately or unfortunately, I think probably this is not the greatest comparison, but Roquan, we love him. We love him in Baltimore.
The guy starts beef
Great guy to
with
talk to.
everybody. Yeah,
But it's not. It's see like
it's
it's not
good-hearted
really
beef.
beef.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
the thing. That's the
playful.
thing. Like
Yeah,
when I was thinking about, all right, who's a guy who likes to talk, but you don't really take it all that seriously. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
back in the day, 50 Cent, God love him, he found himself in a lot of beefs, but we don't really think about them as being all that serious. Like, all right, 50 Cent found himself beefing with, and again, this is completely serious, Ja Rule, Cameron, Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, Rick Ross, Nas. He found himself, Paul, in a beef with Oprah Winfrey.
I mean, I
If
was
you
beefing
Google
with
50
50
Cent,
Cent.
yeah, I know, but you could have never imagined that you would have found yourself beefing with Oprah Winfrey. And I bring this up only to
You get
say
beef,
that like
and you
Roquan
get
Smith,
beef.
Roquan Smith found himself talking last year, and he was able to kind of get away with it only
Right.
because the Ravens were the best team in the NFL. So,
Yeah,
you know, you look
he backed
back,
it up.
he, he very much backed it up. And the Ravens, before they went to Cleveland for that first game last year, he said that the Ravens were going to go to Cleveland and beat the Browns' tails, quote, in front of their wives and kids. And you know what? They did.
He did.
Maybe he shouldn't have used wording that colorful, but he did. And you know what? When Cleveland came to Baltimore in November and beat the Ravens with that just terrible Ravens collapse, there were definitely some Browns, players in that locker room who were all too keen to say, you know what, Roquan, we remember, Ogbo Okoronkwo, after the Ravens lost to Cleveland, he told Cleveland reporters, say whatever you want. If you can back it up, then you can back it up. And this is all quote, but you just might, you got to keep backing up. You got to stand on that. Unfortunately, today they didn't, and we got our get back. So you got to kind of watch out for it. And Roquan in November after Joe Burrow got hurt, when you play the Ravens D, sometimes things like that happen. Roquan in December after the Ravens beat the Jaguars. Again, quote, I heard their little motto this week was be the bully or something like that. Paul, I don't know what he was talking about, but it doesn't really matter because, Roquan keeps receipts, but so do other players around the NFL. So again, low stakes, but
Pun
kind of
intended.
something to keep an eye out for. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jonas, this has been real. Fascinating. I would love to see a comparison at some point. The charge that I'll give you is the beef between Mike Tomlin and Patrick Queen that is now resolved because they're on the same team. But when Mike
Yeah,
Tomlin was
okay,
shouting
and
things
again,
at PQ.
before we kinda wrap things up, I think that is probably I don't know, is it the most interesting beef? Is it like Patrick Queen versus Mike Tomlin? Is it Patrick Queen versus Ravens fans? Because we've kinda already
Yeah, that
seen this percolate a little bit, right?
yeah. Yeah, that is beef that is yet unseasoned. I feel like we could get
Right.
some some, juiciness from that.
Yeah, okay, I mean, like, even last week, he was I think it was Friday or maybe Thursday, he tweeted again, I don't know how much we wanna make of it. I don't know what we will make of it. It's gonna be a long off season. Ravens fans, I still think are working through their feelings, right, about how they feel about Patrick Queen, considering where he was at the start of his career, what he meant to the Ravens at the end of his Ravens career. But
Yeah.
even, on Twitter, he tweeted, "Y'all was on my ass because you know what I can do against you. I love arguing, so you never get under my skin. At the end of the day, y'all avatars be famous people because y'all never amounted to anything in life." So we already have this kind of back and forth between Patrick
Yeah.
Queen and Ravens fans.
Chronically online PQ.
Well, exactly, but Ravens fans, like every other fan base in the NFL, also happen to be very much online. So I don't know if this is like Bow Wow versus Soldier Boy. I don't know if it's Nas versus Jay Z. All I'm saying is that this could be fun. This could be dumb, but we'll probably be talking about it at a certain point during the
We will.
season, right?
Yeah. Jonas, this has been great. This is. Do you think I should just cut the last 15 minutes from our audio only version of the podcast, or do you think
No,
I should keep it in? All right.
no.
This has been 5 minutes of mouse talk, 15 minutes of beef talk, and some snake talk. Sprinkled in there as some seasoning. At Jonas_Shaffer is Jonas's Twitter handle. I'm at Paul Mancano. Please do like, rate, review, subscribe. We will be back next week. We're looking at Tuesdays at 1 o'clock. Tuesdays at 1 o'clock for our Banner Ravens podcast to go live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Jonas?
Yeah. I mean,
You look like you were going to say something.
no, I don't know. We don't know what the hell the NFL is doing with the NFL schedule release.
Yeah, we got to touch on that. Yeah.
So,
We don't have a
again,
definitive day yet for when we're going to get this. We know their opponents,
I know
obviously. We just don't know when.
the NFL had this, very foreboding, ominous. I don't know what word you want to say, but like typically the NFL, this is the week where the NFL puts out the schedule release, but there's been no
And
clarity from the NFL. So who knows if it is next Thursday, then maybe we do something with that. But
yeah,
I don't know.
we'll have something to talk about, be it beef or
Yep.
otherwise. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano.